At the core of our animation engine resides the important critical component of our transform channels. As animators, we're only ever going to be animating objects, and that goes for kind of like all 3D apps, if you will. We're only ever animating objects. We're never going in and animating the verts, the edges, and the polygons, just the basic transform channels that are associated with an object. Let's go in and start looking at these transform channels because they're super important. I've already changed my selection state to be inside of object mode, and I'm going to click on our little coin here, our badge, and begin to examine its content. Specifically, if we zoom in, check it out. Over in our outliner, we get a nice visual reinforcer that we're working with this object. One thing to be very mindful of, and this is kind of a blender thing, we have, of course, the highlighted row that shows us what's selected, but you see this rounded rectangle? That's showing us what the active object is, and it's important that we manage that little rounded rectangle behind the mesh object icon in our outliner. It's just a nice kind of visual reinforcer, gives us a lot of confidence that what we're looking at downstairs in our properties panel is in fact associated with the object we are desiring to change. Now, if we zoom down a little bit into our into our properties panels, we have a bunch of properties. The developers down at the Blender Foundation have exposed a lot of information, and at times, yeah, it can be like super overwhelming, right? There's a lot of information in here. Luckily, they've color-coded it, and the one that we want to pay the most attention to is this orange one, this orange square. This is going to expose all of our transform information, all of the object properties that are associated with the object we have selected. In this case, it's our badge, our little coin. And if these are our transform channels. This, believe it or not, is the underlying core of our entire animation system. We're only ever going to be animating the location, the rotation, and scale of the objects inside of our scene. Even with characters, we're just changing location, rotation of scale of hundreds of different objects that are all working in harmony to create the movement of our characters. However, the fundamental foundation, if you will, is the changing of all of these channels. Let's take a look at it real fast. I'm going to zoom out. Of course, we can go in and physically move our objects around in the scene, but since we're talking about these channels, it's an important idea that we look at this. Of course, if we just left click and drag on this object here, or this channel box here, we can turn it into a slider, which is pretty neat. Same goes with the rotation as well. We can very quickly go in and change the rotation values of this to spin it. We can even change the scale. In addition to being able to transform these as sliders just by left clicking and dragging on each individual channel, we can simply single left click and then using our keyboard, we just enter in a value and that will change the value to whatever we want it to be. So if I go into rotation Z, for example, just hit 0 on my numpad, boom, there we go. I can type in a value very, very quickly. Well, one of the other options that we have, in addition to numerically going in and changing these values, is using the transform tools, which are great. They allow us to very quickly get up and running and changing these values interactively. Even though I'm a computer guy and I like working with these computer tools, I'm also an artist. So being able to visually use a much more conducive tool to the artistic workflow is attractive to me. Now, on the left-hand part of our OpenGL viewport, our 3D view, there used to be a toolbar that lives there, and we're accustomed to seeing a whole series of tools if we're coming from the intro 3D modeling class or the intro to animation class, but they've kind of turned it off, if you will, inside of the animation workspace. But not to fret, hitting the T key, T as in Tango, will slide that little bit of interface back out into the universe, and now we have access to all of our tools. The selection tool is one that we've been looking at, but also these guys in here, these are our transform tools. The transform tools will allow us to go in and very quickly move, edit, or move, rotate, and scale our object. So I've committed these to memory. So we got the move tool here. And selecting the move tool will give us these wonderful arrows that will allow us to change the location of our object. Also hitting the G key, G as in grab or as in golf, will allow us to interactively change the location of our objects as well. Now I'm going to put my little coin way over here, and I want you to be very mindful of how that transformation is being adopted by all of these transform channels. At the object level, anytime we make a change, the location, rotation, or scale, the computer's tracking all of this. It's kind of managing the location of this. It's keeping a very complex database of the object's location, rotation, and scale. Now, what's cool about this is that we can very easily go in and reset them. Check this out. I've moved the coin pretty significantly away from the location, its default starting location, the origin point of our three-dimensional scene. I could go in and change all three of these values at the same time. This is a really great example of why you want to work with a mouse, because I can left click and drag down. I'm going to do it all in kind of one mighty fell swoop. Zoom. See how I selected all three of them? All three of the channel boxes turned this kind of dark black, dark gray, and any change that I make to one while they're all selected will be immediately adopted and applied to all three, which is pretty rad, pretty nifty. So the G key is going to allow us to move. Of course, the R key is going to allow us to rotate. And the S key is going to allow us to scale up and down. As animators, though, we don't want to rely exclusively on the screen space transformation, meaning that if I was to grab this object, notice over in my channel box, I'm actually moving these along all three axes simultaneously. That's an undesirable feature. So this is where the keyboard shortcuts and these tools in our toolbar really play a much more direct role. We want to be able to use the tool handles to limit the rotation values and control the location, rotation, and scale very directly. The more control we have over the object, the more editability our animations are going to provide to us. We don't want to be animating kind of in this uncontrolled space. We want to be able to very, very carefully move and rotate and scale along any of the individual axes. So inside of Blender, of course, naturally, our move tools, our rotation tools, and our scale tools are tools that we see in both the edit mode and in the object mode. But when it comes time to working with these transform channels, the object mode is going to reset, or it's going to keep all of these values preserved. We can always simply zero them out and get our objects back to their starting location, if you will. And that's thanks to the magic and the power of these transform channels. Get comfortable coming to this area. Commit this orange property box, if you will, to memory. We're going to be coming back to this over and over and over again. Play around with how all of the tools, the move tool, the rotation tool, and the scale tool, are going to interactively change these transforms and zero them out. Put them back to their starting size, location, and rotation, and begin to get comfortable working with our transform channels.